It was one of those chilly winter afternoons when the air in London seemed to bite at the skin, and the streets were less crowded than usual. The sky was overcast, and a soft but persistent drizzle fell from the clouds above, turning the cobblestone streets into a mix of puddles and slippery spots. People hurried along, clutching their coats tightly around them, trying to get out of the cold. The iconic Tower of London stood tall and imposing, a symbol of centuries of history, while the nearby tourists huddled in small groups, trying to avoid getting soaked by the rain. Among the tourists and passers-by, there was a figure who stood out. A man dressed in worn clothes and a military cap sat on the cold stone steps near the tower's entrance. His face was weathered, with deep lines that spoke of a life filled with hardship. And his hands, which were wrapped tightly around a small tin cup, shook from the cold. He wasn't asking for much, just a little change, a bit of kindness to help him through another difficult day. His appearance wasn't unusual for someone in his situation. The city was full of homeless people. It seemed like no one ever had time to notice them anymore. This man, however, was different. He wasn't just someone begging on the street. He had once been a soldier, a man who had served his country with pride. He had stories to tell, stories of bravery, stories of comrades he had lost, and stories of how he ended up in the streets, far from the life he had once known. But no one seemed to notice him or care about his past. Most people walked by without even glancing in his direction as he sat there, waiting for someone, anyone, to spare a few coins or a kind word. He couldn't help but feel a sense of loneliness creeping in. The rain made everything feel worse, making the world seem even colder and more indifferent. He had once been someone important, someone who had been respected and admired, but now it seemed that no one cared. The sound of footsteps and muffled chatter surrounded him, but it was as if he were invisible. Just as he was starting to lose hope, he noticed something unusual. A figure in a red uniform with a tall black hat appeared in his line of sight. At first, the homeless man thought little of it. After all, royal guards were a common sight in London, especially around the Tower of London. But this guard didn't walk by with the usual air of stoic indifference. Instead, the guard stopped in front of him, looking down at the man. The homeless man was taken aback. Guards didn't stop for people like him. They didn't speak to the homeless. They had their duties: stand still, look forward, and never engage with the public. That was the rule. But this guard was different. His posture was relaxed, not rigid, and his expression wasn't cold, but one of genuine concern. "Are you all right, mate?" the guard asked in a soft, warm voice. The homeless man looked up, surprised by the kindness in the guard's tone. Most people would have ignored him, or at best, tossed a coin his way. But this guard wasn't offering money. He was offering something more valuable, a moment of humanity. I'm fine," the man muttered, though his voice trembled from the cold. He wasn't used to being spoken to with such care. Most people in his position had learned to accept the harshness of the world. But this was different. The guard knelt down to the man's level, looking him directly in the eyes. There was no judgment in the guard's gaze, only understanding. "You don't have to be fine," the guard said, his voice sincere. "If you're hungry or cold, I can help you. Do you need something to eat?" The homeless man, who had been used to the indifference of others, found himself at a loss for words. He hadn't expected help, especially not from someone like this royal guard, someone who was supposed to be beyond reach, above the everyday struggles of the people around him. And yet here he was, offering help without hesitation. "I haven't eaten in a while," the man finally admitted, feeling a little ashamed but also grateful. His stomach growled, reminding him of how long it had been since he had last had a proper meal. Without another word, the guard stood up and reached into the bag slung over his shoulder. He pulled out a sandwich, wrapped neatly in paper, and handed it to the man. "Here," he said. "I'm not sure what you like, but I think you'll be all right with this. Take it." The homeless man's hand shook as he accepted the sandwich, unsure whether to be grateful or to question the sincerity of what was happening. Was this a dream? Guards didn't do things like this. They were always so distant, so removed from the ordinary lives of the people around them. But here was this one, doing something small but meaningful. "Thank you," the man said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. He felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: dignity. The simple act of receiving a meal from the guard reminded him that he was still a person, not just a man sitting on the streets. For the first time in months, he didn't feel invisible. The guard smiled, though his face remained mostly expressionless, as was customary for royal guards. "You're welcome," he said, before standing up and looking around. "Take care of yourself, all right?" As the guard turned and began to walk away, the homeless man watched him, his heart full of gratitude. It wasn't just the sandwich that meant so much. It was the fact that someone had seen him, really seen him, and cared enough to take a moment out of their day to offer help. In a city full of people, this guard had reminded him that kindness still existed in the world. Even in places where it was least expected, the homeless man took a bite of the sandwich. Feeling the warmth of the food spread through him, it wasn't just the physical warmth that mattered. It was the warmth of knowing that someone had taken the time to help. As he chewed, he felt a little less alone in the world. For the rest of the day, he sat there, finishing the sandwich slowly, watching as people walked by. But this time, he didn't feel invisible. He felt like he mattered, even if it was just for a moment. And in that moment, the kindness of a royal guard had made all the difference. It was a bright, bustling afternoon at Buckingham Palace. The sun was high in the sky, casting a golden glow over the palace's famous gates. And tourists from all over the world crowded the area. Some were snapping photos, while others stood in awe of the grand building in front of them, admiring the tradition and history of the royal residence. The atmosphere was lively, and the sound of chatter filled the air. The guards, as always, stood motionless in their red uniforms and tall black hats, keeping their post with a sense of dignity and discipline that was known worldwide. Among them stood a royal guard, his eyes scanning the area with the practiced precision of someone who had stood in place for hours. He was used to the attention, used to the long shifts, and used to the tourists who often asked him the same questions over and over. Yet as he stood there, a sudden movement in the crowd caught his eye. A small, frightened figure stood by the palace gates, looking lost. A young child, no more than 6 or 7 years old, was standing alone, looking around nervously. Her eyes were wide with confusion, and her small hands fidgeted nervously at her sides. She was surrounded by people, but no one seemed to notice her distress. The royal guard's eyes softened. It was moments like these, though rare, that made him feel the weight of his duty in a way he couldn't explain. He had always been taught to stand still, never move, and to maintain his composure in the face of anything. But this was different. This was not a drill or a moment where discipline was everything. This was a child in trouble. For a brief moment, he hesitated. Should he break protocol? Was it worth stepping away from his post for a few seconds? But when he looked back at the child, who was now looking around frantically, his decision was made. He could not simply stand there and watch her suffer. The guard took a slow, steady step forward, his boots making soft taps against the stone ground. He approached the child, his presence perhaps intimidating to someone who did not know what to expect from a royal guard. But the child didn't seem frightened. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with both relief and fear. As if she wasn't sure whether she should trust the tall man in front of her, he knelt down to her level, bending his knees so that they were eye to eye. His tall hat, usually a symbol of authority, now seemed less imposing. The guard smiled gently, hoping to calm her nerves. "Hey there," he said softly, his deep voice warm yet calm. "Are you lost?" The little girl nodded, biting her lip. Her face was flushed, and her eyes began to fill with tears. "I can't find my mommy," she whispered, her voice trembling. The guard's heart sank, but he stayed calm. He had dealt with many stressful situations in his time as a royal guard, but nothing had ever felt as urgent as this moment. "Don't worry," he said, his voice reassuring. "I'm here to help you." He glanced around quickly, looking for anyone who might be searching for the little girl. Tourists were still wandering by, but no one seemed to be looking for a missing child. His eyes quickly spotted a nearby officer in uniform, another member of the security team. Without missing a beat, the guard stood and called to the officer. "Excuse me, I think this little one has lost her family. Could you help find her parents?" The officer quickly nodded, recognizing the situation at once. He immediately went to work, alerting the rest of the team and starting to ask the surrounding tourists if they had seen a child who might have gotten separated from her group. The guard turned back to the little girl who was now looking up at him with wide, hopeful eyes. "You'll be okay," he reassured her. "We'll find your mommy. Just stay with me for a little while, all right?" The girl nodded, wiping a tear away from her cheek with the back of her hand. She seemed to take comfort in his presence, even though she didn't fully understand who he was or why he was helping. For her, he was simply a kind stranger in a uniform who had taken the time to notice her when everyone else was too busy. Minutes passed, and the guard kept talking to her, telling her little stories about the palace and the famous changing of the guards that took place every day. His calm, friendly manner worked wonders, and the little girl began to relax, her anxiety slowly melting away with each passing minute. Then, as if by some small miracle, a woman appeared in the crowd. Calling the child's name, the little girl's face lit up with a huge smile as she recognized her mother. The guard stepped back, watching the reunion unfold before him. The woman rushed toward her daughter, bending down to embrace her tightly, her face filled with relief and joy. "Oh, thank goodness," the mother exclaimed, looking at the guard with grateful eyes. "I've been searching for her everywhere. I don't know how she got separated." The guard simply nodded, his expression kind but quiet. "She's safe now," he said, and with that, he returned to his post, never expecting thanks or recognition for his actions. His job was to keep watch, to remain in position, but for a brief moment. He had stepped outside that role and made a real difference. The little girl, now safely in her mother's arms, waved at the guard as they walked away. The guard gave a small wave back, stoic expression softening for just a second as he watched the family disappear into the crowd. He felt a quiet satisfaction in his heart, knowing that his simple act of kindness had made all the difference in that child's day, though he would return to his post and resume his duties. The guard knew he had done something important, something that would stay with that child, and perhaps her mother too, for years to come. And while it might not have been part of his official duties, it was a reminder of the humanity behind the uniform. It was one of those bitterly cold days in Windsor, the kind of day when the wind seemed to cut through your clothes and make you shiver to the bone. People were bundled up in scarves, coats, and hats, hurrying along the streets, trying to get out of the chill as quickly as possible. The streets were lined with beautiful, centuries-old buildings, and at the center of it all stood the majestic Windsor Castle, its stone walls towering high against the gray sky. Windsor Castle was bustling with tourists that day. People from all over the world had come to witness the grandeur of the royal residence, to catch a glimpse of British history and to explore the ancient grounds. Some stood in awe, taking photos, while others whispered excitedly to each other about the royal family. However, despite the bustle of the crowd, the cold weather made the streets feel quieter than usual. Outside the castle gates, there was a woman who stood out among the crowd. She was a tourist having come to England with her family. Originally from a warm country, she wasn't prepared for the intense cold of a British winter. She had been walking around the area, trying to take in the sights, but as the temperature dropped, she began to feel the cold seep into her bones. Her cheeks were flushed from the chill, and her hands were numb despite the gloves she was wearing. She wished she had brought a thicker coat. But now it was too late to turn back. The woman tried to shake off the cold, hoping to stay warm as she continued her walk around the castle, but it didn't help. The wind picked up, making her shiver even harder. She glanced around and noticed that most of the tourists were heading toward a nearby cafe, probably to warm up with a hot drink. But she didn't feel like walking any further. She felt weak from the cold and could already feel a headache starting to build. As she stood near the gates of Windsor Castle, trying to gather the strength to move on, she noticed someone coming toward her. It was a royal guard, standing tall in his red uniform and black bearskin hat. He was positioned in front of the castle, as he had been all morning, looking as though he was completely unfazed by the cold weather. Most people were used to seeing the guards standing motionless, their eyes forward, their faces stern and unmoving. They were symbols of strength, discipline, and tradition. But to the woman, They also seemed a little distant. However, something unusual happened. The guard, despite his usual duty of standing still and keeping his position, noticed the woman. He had been watching the crowd as usual, but her shivering caught his attention. He could tell she was uncomfortable. Something about the way she was standing, slowly shifting from foot to foot, was trying to warm up, made him pause. Without thinking twice, the guard walked over to her. The woman was too cold and distracted to notice him approach until he was standing right in front of her. She looked up, startled, her breath forming small clouds in the chilly air. The guard smiled gently, something she hadn't expected from someone so tall and imposing in his uniform. "Excuse me," he said, his voice warm and steady. "Are you all right? You look like you're freezing." The woman blinked in surprise. Royal guards didn't usually speak to the public. She wasn't sure if she had imagined it or if this guard had really addressed her. "I'm just cold," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper, her teeth chattering slightly. "I didn't expect it to be this chilly." The guard nodded, understanding all too well. He had seen many tourists struggling with the cold, especially those who came from warmer countries. It wasn't uncommon for people to underestimate how cold it could get in England during the winter months. "Here," the guard said, taking off his own coat. He unfolded the heavy woolen coat, which was lined with thick fur, and draped it over her shoulders before she could protest. The coat was warm, and its weight instantly made her feel more protected from the biting wind. The woman was taken aback. She had never expected anything like this. Guards were supposed to stand in their positions and be as unmoving as statues, not go around helping people. She tried to protest, but the guard was already stepping back, giving her a reassuring smile. "No need to thank me," he said softly, his eyes kind. "It's much too cold for anyone to be standing out here like this." "You'll warm up soon with that coat," the woman, still surprised, didn't know what to say. She had never met anyone so kind, especially not someone like this, a royal guard who had a reputation for being tough and unapproachable. She could see the warmth in his eyes, though, and that comforted her more than the coat ever could. "Are you sure you're okay?" the guard asked. "I can find you a place to warm up if you like." No, she said quickly, shaking her head. "Thank you. I just didn't want to go inside yet. I wanted to see the castle." "Understandable," he said, giving her another smile. "But make sure you're safe and warm first." With that, he nodded and began to walk away, returning to his post as if nothing had happened. The woman watched him go, still amazed. It wasn't every day that you encountered someone so selfless, so willing to break from their usual duty to help someone else. She pulled the coat tightly around herself, the warmth seeping through, and felt a deep sense of gratitude toward the guard. Her thoughts were interrupted as she realized how much warmer she felt now. The chill that had once made her feel numb was starting to fade, and the headache that had begun to build was easing. She smiled to herself, realizing that this small act of kindness had made her day so much better. She decided to make her way to a cafe nearby to get some hot tea. But as she walked, she couldn't stop thinking about the guard. It wasn't just the coat, it was the way he had noticed her discomfort and gone out of his way to help her. He didn't have to do it. It wasn't part of his job, and he could have easily ignored her and stuck to the rules. But he didn't. He had seen someone in need, and he had acted without a second thought. For the rest of the day, as she toured the castle and enjoyed the sights, the woman couldn't help but carry the warmth of the guard's kindness with her. It was one of those rare moments when a stranger, a person who had no obligation to help, made a small but significant difference in her life. She knew that she would remember it for a long time, and every time she thought about it, it would bring a smile to her face. It was a rainy day in Hyde Park, the kind of day where the sky seems to open up and pour down relentlessly. The air was damp, and the sound of raindrops hitting the ground and the trees was almost constant. People walked by quickly, trying to stay dry under umbrellas or huddled inside warm jackets. But the weather seemed to be putting a damper on everyone's spirits. The park, which was usually lively with people out for a stroll, seemed emptier than usual. Most people were either huddling in nearby cafes or rushing to get to their next destination. But in the middle of all the grayness, a group of children was having the time of their lives. They were huddled under a large oak tree, laughing and running around, splashing in the puddles that had formed on the path. Their bright, colorful raincoats stood out against the dull backdrop of the rainy day. For a while, they didn't seem to mind the weather at all. In fact, the rain made the whole situation even more exciting. There was something magical about the way the water splashed under their feet as they ran through the puddles, their laughter filling the air and echoing through the park. One of the children, a little boy with messy hair and a wide grin on his face, jumped into a particularly large puddle, and the water splashed all around him. His friends cheered, encouraging him to do it again. They were completely lost in their game, oblivious to the fact that the rain was only getting heavier by the minute. However, their fun was suddenly interrupted when the rain began to pour harder. The kids huddled under the tree, trying to stay out of the worst of the downpour, but they could see that the rain wasn't letting up anytime soon. Some of them started to whine, the excitement of the game fading as they realized they might have to leave the park and go back to their homes. Soaked and disappointed, the park's paths, once filled with happy chatter, now seemed empty. Most people had hurried off to find shelter from the downpour, but the children didn't want to go home just yet. They were upset that their playtime was being cut short, and they stood there, looking out into the park with sad faces. The little boy who had jumped into the puddle earlier kicked a stone, frustrated. The others were quietly murmuring to each other, not sure what to do next. Just then, something unexpected happened. A royal guard, dressed in his signature red uniform and towering black bearskin hat, walked through the gates of the park. He was on his way back to his post after taking a break. He had been patrolling nearby, and though the rain was heavy, he didn't seem to mind. The guard had seen many things during his service, but today, something caught his attention. He noticed the group of children standing under the tree, their faces downcast, their energy drained by the weather. The rain seemed to have taken away their joy, and he could see that they were disappointed. For a moment, the guard stood there, watching the children. He had been trained to stand still, to remain disciplined in his duties. But today, he felt a different kind of urge. He wanted to do something. He couldn't stand by and watch these children's spirits fall just because of a little rain. Without a second thought, he walked over to them. The children looked up in surprise when they saw him approaching. They had seen guards like him around the park before, but they never expected one to come over and talk to them, especially in the middle of a rainy afternoon. The guard gave them a small smile, his serious demeanor softening for a moment. "Hey there," said, his deep voice cutting through the sound of the rain. "What's going on? You all look like you could use a little cheer." The children stared at him for a moment, surprised. They had never expected a royal guard to speak to them, let alone ask them what was wrong. One of the older girls, who was usually the leader of their group, stepped forward. "We were having so much fun, but now it's raining so hard, and we don't want to go home yet," she said, her voice a little sad. The guard looked at them thoughtfully, the rain dripping off his uniform. "I see," he said. "Well, there's no need to let a little rain stop you. I've got an idea." The children's faces lit up. They weren't sure what the guard had in mind, but they were willing to listen. The guard gave a small nod and then did something completely unexpected. He reached down and pulled out a bagpipe from behind his back. The children's eyes went wide in disbelief. A royal guard, with his tall hat and serious face, was going to play the bagpipes for them. The guard smiled, though he didn't let on that he had a bit of a playful side. What better way to get through a rainy day than with some music? He said, giving the bagpipe a little adjustment. He began to play, and the sound of the bagpipes cut through the air like a beautiful, sweeping melody. The children watched in awe, their frowns turning into wide grins as the sound filled the park. The guard didn't just play a quick tune. He played several, one after another. It wasn't just a quick hello with the bagpipes. It was as though he was inviting the children to join him in the music as the guard played. The children's mood lifted instantly. The music, loud and cheerful, seemed to chase away the gloom of the rainy day. Some of the younger children started dancing, spinning around in circles to the rhythm of the music. Others clapped their hands or tapped their feet along with the tune. For the first time that afternoon, the rain didn't matter. The sound of the bagpipes became the focus of everything, filling the air with life and energy. The guard, lost in the joy of the music, didn't stop. He played for what felt like an eternity, but it didn't matter. Every second was filled with laughter and excitement. The children were now completely immersed in the music. Their earlier disappointment seemed like a distant memory. They were no longer bothered by the rain. They were too busy enjoying the performance and making the most of their time. As the final note of the last song echoed through the park, the guard stopped playing and gave the children a small bow. "There," he said with a wink, "that should warm you up a bit." The children cheered and clapped, their faces beaming with happiness. They thanked the guard over and over, and though he didn't expect it, it felt good to know that his music had made such a difference. The guard smiled to himself as he turned to leave, heading back toward his post. He knew that this small moment would stay with the children for a long time. And as for him, it was a reminder that sometimes the simplest acts of kindness, like playing a song on a rainy day, could turn everything around. The children's laughter and excitement filled the air as he walked away, the sound of their joy echoing behind him, warming his heart even more than the music had. Asterisk. It was a quiet afternoon in London, with only a few people walking along the street near St. James's Park. The usual hustle and bustle of the city had slowed down as the sun began to dip behind the clouds, casting a soft golden glow over the buildings. The air was crisp, hinting at the arrival of evening. People who had been out all day were now hurrying home, eager to escape the chill and settle down after a busy day. As the streets began to empty, one elderly woman slowly made her way across the busy road, her steps measured and careful. She was dressed in a long coat and a scarf wrapped tightly around her neck. But her pace was slow, and she seemed unsure of herself. The woman was clearly struggling with the uneven pavement, her steps wobbling slightly as she tried to avoid the puddles left by the morning's rain. She was carrying a small shopping bag in one hand, but it looked as though every step was an effort, though it wasn't a busy intersection. The cars rushing past made it difficult for the woman to cross. She paused at the curb, hesitating. There were no crosswalks nearby, and the traffic was moving quickly, making it unsafe for her to step into the road. She looked both ways, hoping for a gap in the traffic. But the cars kept coming, and it seemed like they weren't slowing down. The elderly woman seemed lost in thought, wondering if she should just wait until the traffic calmed down. But it wasn't easy for her to stand there for long. Her legs were tired, and the cold was making her feel weaker with every passing minute. She was beginning to feel helpless, unsure how to get to the other side of the street where her home was just a short walk away at that moment. A figure appeared in her line of sight. It was a royal guard, standing tall in his red uniform and black bearskin hat, his back straight and posture firm. The woman, unaware of his presence at first, continued to stand at the curb, hoping the cars would give her a break. But when she looked up, she saw the guard approaching her. His presence was unmistakable. He was impossible to miss, with his uniform and tall hat giving him an air of authority and dignity. The guard, seeing the woman standing uncertainly at the curb, quickly assessed the situation. He noticed the car speeding by and saw how difficult it was for her to cross the street. Without a moment of hesitation, the guard made his way toward her. He wasn't bothered by the traffic or the chilly air. His focus was on the woman who needed help. "Excuse me, madame," the guard said, his deep voice breaking through the noise of the passing cars. The woman turned to him in surprise. She hadn't expected anyone to pay attention to her, much less a royal guard. But the guard smiled gently, offering her a reassuring presence. "Would you like help crossing the street?" he asked kindly. The woman blinked in shock, unsure at first if she had heard him correctly. She had seen guards like him before, standing stiff and silent outside palaces and government buildings. But she never imagined one of them would offer help to an elderly woman trying to cross a busy street. "Yes, please," she said, her voice trembling with both relief and gratitude. She had been so unsure of herself just moments ago, but now she felt as though someone truly cared. The guard didn't wait for another word. He stepped forward and positioned himself in front of her, turning to face the street. With a firm hand, he signaled to the oncoming cars, urging them to stop. He stood tall, his figure blocking the path, commanding the attention of the drivers. Within seconds, the cars began to slow, giving the elderly woman a chance to cross safely. The guard turned back to her, offering a supportive arm, "I'll walk with you," he said, his tone gentle. The woman, feeling a sense of security she hadn't felt all day, gratefully accepted his arm. She leaned on him slightly as they began to cross the street together. The rain had stopped, but the chill in the air still lingered. The woman's steps felt more confident now, knowing that the guard was by her side. As they crossed, the woman glanced at the guard. She noticed how calm he was, how he seemed completely at ease in his role. But his kindness was evident in the way he kept pace with her, making sure she didn't feel rushed or uncomfortable. He wasn't just a figure of authority. He was a human being, offering help when it was most needed. When they reached the other side of the street, the guard didn't just stop and walk away. He made sure the woman was safely on the sidewalk before stepping back. "You're safe now," he said with a warm smile, giving her a reassuring nod. The woman, overwhelmed by the kindness of the guard, looked up at him with deep gratitude. "Thank you so much," she said, her voice full of emotion. "I don't know what I would have done without you. I've been standing there for so long, waiting for a break in the traffic." "It's no trouble at all," the guard replied, his voice kind but calm. "I'm glad I could help." For a moment, neither of them said anything. The street around them was quiet now, with only a few pedestrians walking by. The woman stood a little taller, her heart lifted by the simple but significant gesture of the guard's kindness. She hadn't expected anything like this from someone in uniform, especially not from a royal guard. But in that moment, she realized that true kindness could be found anywhere, sometimes in the most unexpected places. With one last nod of acknowledgement, the guard turned back to his post. His job was to stand still and maintain order, but in that brief interaction, he had done something much more important. He had made a real difference in someone's life. And as he walked away, he felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. He had followed the rules, but he had also gone beyond them to help someone in need. The elderly woman, still feeling the warmth of his kindness, smiled as she watched him walk back to his position. She knew she would never forget this small but meaningful moment. For her, it wasn't just about crossing the street, it was about feeling seen and cared for when she needed it most. And as she continued on her way, she felt a little less alone in the world.